James O'Keefe joins us now via Skype. James, always good to see you. The FDA was trying to say that this guy didn't represent anything that doesn't represent the FDA. I mean, he's got the title. He works with the FDA. He's at the FDA. He knows all this stuff, but still doesn't represent the FDA, which nobody believes. What did you make of their excuse?
Well, yeah, what's remarkable, Dana, is I got two statements from the FDA on the record, which is like the first time in Project Veritas history. They said the person purportedly in the video, I don't know what they mean by purported, does not work on vaccine matters. And then what the thing about this is Christopher Cole, an executive at the FDA, actually, he says he works on the emergency authorizations, particularly when it relates to these toddler vaccines. So they contradicted each other. We put out part 2 where they're talking about the streaming fountain of revenue, billions of dollars a year going into the FDA's budget from the pharmaceutical companies they regulate. And when they get the money, it's a higher chance of approval. And now the FDA says, quote, this is the second statement, quote, this person does not represent the views of the FDA, nor does he speak on behalf of the agency. Dan, that's why we do undercover work, because we want to expose what they don't want you to know. They're never going to just, bow down and say, you got us. They'll never say that. But obviously, they take it seriously, Dana, because they've issued 2 statements on the record to Project Veritas.
And they took the trouble to make those public statements, which normally, yeah, you're right. They haven't done that. Talking with James O'Keefe with Project Veritas. And this has kind of driven a lot of the skepticism that people have and the lack of trust that they have for these agencies, because there hasn't been any transparency. And especially when we're talking about vaccinations, as you were saying, the toddler shots too. And which is kind of a separate issue from what we're discussing here, but not needed. They're not reservoirs for the virus. 0 fatalities unless there's a serious comorbidity. But this is about money. I mean, it's safe to say that this is just about raking in money for these big companies who are able to sell this to the government and mandate that everyone take this product. It's kind of like how they nationalized healthcare. If you mandate that people have to get a product, the people who are offering that product and making it are going to make a ton of bank.
Yeah, I mean, this is the second installment we released, Dana. FDA, Christopher Cole, executive officer here. Some quotes I just want to repeat. Congress approved the user fees for the FDA. We, the FDA, charge the industry millions of dollars to hire more drug reviewers and vaccine reviewers, which will speed up the approval process. He also says, Cole says on retaliation, the government, quote, you'll be marked, targeted from getting other jobs because another office is not going to want to hire you if you've spoken out about something wrong. So this guy is saying these things which do not surprise anybody. But of course, it's always interesting to confirm our suspicions that it's a fountain of revenue. We review the products, we get the money to rubber stamp the thing. And then he says with these toddler vaccines, I think the most shocking part of the expose is that he says, we're not going to not approve the 6-month-old vaccination. We're just going to do it because under our emergency use authorization, all of these things are under the rubric of an emergency. Therefore, we're just going to rubber stamp it. That was, of course, he said this days before the FDA rescheduled this, but that's pretty shocking. I guess it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no oversight. It's maybe corruption is the wrong word. Maybe illegal is the wrong word, but it's a racket. And it's all laid bare to see. The question now is, what is going to happen to this man? Does he still work there? And that's something that we're looking into.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You know what this reminds me of, too? We're talking with James O'Keefe with Project Veritas on this undercover video that they had talking with this FDA executive, Christopher Cole. This sounds a lot like a kind of the behavioral credit scoring system that the CCP uses in order to, I guess, mark people's fealty to the CCP in China. You can't travel, you can't do this, you can't get this kind of job unless you have this kind of a credit score. That's kind of, it seems more in lines with that than actual health.
Yeah, it does seem to be about money, really. That's what I would say. It's maybe also a credit score, but this idea that you're going to more likely to get the product approved, and it's a reoccurring fountain of revenue, a fountain of money. It's all about the money. Christopher Cole, we met with him 5 times.
Yeah.
And again, to your point, to my shock, he actually spoke to me, James O'Keefe, for 35 minutes.
Yeah.
I've never had that happen before. And I'm on this call with this guy after we recorded him 5 meetings. And he said to me, he goes, your person was really good, very good. So he gave an endorsement to our undercover journalist,
Oh,
which
please
was
tell me you're going to use that on marketing materials.
we did put it on Instagram. We did put that. And then he also says, he really impeached his credibility. He said, well, I misspoke. I was in a private place. I said, well, you're in a restaurant and you knew that you were being interviewed. You didn't know you were being interviewed by a journalist, but you knew you were telling the public as a representative of the FDA. And then finally he says, oh, you're going to make this a storm, James. This is going to be such a big SHIT storm. And I said, well, that's the purpose of a muckraker, is to expose. This is the Food and Drug Administration, Chris, working in tandem with pharmaceutical companies. So
Yes.
I hope this inspires more people inside the FDA to come out.
And by the way, speaking of your muckraker, your book, American Muckraker, Rethinking Journalism for the 21st Century, came out January. And this is kind of what this, because this is ultimately, that's what investigative journalism is supposed to do. Now, you were talking about the money. Obviously pharmaceutical companies, but somebody's got to be getting kickbacks from this for helping to facilitate all of this, to process this, to sell it to lawmakers who at some point are going to have to support mandates on this. Do you know who's making the money off it? It's not just everybody in big pharma.
Well, that's a good point. I can only tell you what he told me. He revealed to us the FDA tones down the impact that they're called user fees, have on the agency's operations because, quote, they are dependent on the drug companies and the vaccine companies and these other companies for their agency to operate. So it strikes me that we have a problem in American society. And this reminds me a lot of the symbiotic relationship between like the New York Times and the FBI,
right? Which
is so shocking to me, as an independent citizen American muckraker. Why are these organizations in cahoots with one another when they should be adversarial, right?
Checks and balances.
Checks and balances, whether just like in our federal government. Our New York Times should be adversarial with our Federal Bureau of Investigation. Yeah. Our Food and Drug Administration should be adversarial with big pharmaceutical companies. So the good news is they'll say the truth unspoken, but they'll only do it when they don't know they're being recorded. So we need more of these hidden cameras to expose them. But I think the answer to your question is, to me, it's about the money. It's about a symbiotic relationship with those in power vis-a-vis a reciprocity of mutual interest. Yeah. And they've gotten too cozy with one another. It's a tale as old as time, but it's something that this man, who's an executive officer at the FDA, told us in the restaurant he did not know he was being recorded.
And this guy, because you mentioned that he still apparently is at the FDA, so I guess he didn't do really anything wrong. He's still
What's interesting about that is the FDA gave us an on-the-record statement on Tuesday night before we released the first story.
Right.
And then I called Cole, and he told me, I didn't know that the FDA gave you a statement. So the FDA gave us a statement without even speaking to their own executive officer. Wow. That's an extraordinary series of events.
Yeah.
And that should tell you something, that they're trying to, I guess, distance themselves from what he said. But he told me on the phone, he's like, James, I had no idea. I'm learning about this from you. So.
Wow. They're not on the same page. Let me ask you this, talking with James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, we have the State of the Union address coming up, and there are a lot of Democrat governors that have been walking back where it concerns pushing vaccines, whether it's pushing vaccines for certain, for 5 to 11-year-olds, or mask mandates. And it seems like we're now starting to get more momentum on pushing back against this kind of stuff than, the other way around. Is that going to affect any of this stuff you think that you've uncovered? Is that going to affect the relationship that these companies, Big Pharma, has with FDA? Is that going to affect how they're going to approach this, how they're trying to sell it to the public? Or is it not going to alter their plans at all, do you think, just from what you've been able to find out?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think this guy, Chris Cole, said that Biden wants to inoculate as many people as possible. You have to get an annual shot. I don't know the answer to that. I think there's a populist, speaking politically, I think there's a populist uprising, and there's certainly a gap between how information is presented in the media and how people actually feel about this issue. hell, how people even feel inside the own FDA about this
Right.
issue.
Apparently.
I'm not certain that everything this man said. I mean, there's a slight villainous tendency to him, but there's also kind of
Yeah.
there's an everyman tendency to him too. He's like speaking as if it was Dana or James O'Keefe working at the FDA, and he's talking about the fountain of revenue and how it works. But that's really the problem in contemporary American society, is that the gap between what the truth is and how things are presented just seems to be widening.
Right.
And as long as that continues to happen in terms of the State of the Union and the state of informed consent in our beloved country, people are angry because what they're seeing on CNN and what they're seeing on Twitter is so different than how reality actually is. What that means for our elections is anyone's guess.
Right.
But I'm going to hopefully widen that or shorten that gap rather by exposing what's going on.
It's interesting, the division between what is and what isn't is expanding, while the relationship between the checks and balances has all but, I think, closed. I mean, they're very, very cozy with each other, the exact opposite of the way it should be. James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, and make sure you check out his book, American Muckraker, Rethinking Journalism for the 21st Century, and you can find projectveritas.com as well. So appreciate you doing this and blowing the whistle on this stuff. Keep raking the muck. We appreciate you, James.
Thank you, Dana.
Take care.